I think the only full book written is this one, which Sylvia's getting right now. By David Gaharon. Similar title of the Crime World of Michael Connelly. It's a very good book. It has synopses of it came out in 2020. It is not on Audible, but you can get it. It is on Kindle. So I found it to be it's clearly written, and I found it very useful. It's synopses of the novel, kind of biography. It also goes into the screenings of the Bosch and Bosch legacy shows. He does the whole thing. So it's a good book. Follow up to read more about the economy. And I put up here a picture of the Garden of Human Delights
on the table.
On the table, but next week, thanks to Doug, we're going to have slides on the big screen.
Oh, come on, you guys.
In the Bosch paintings, which are very much part of the novel. That'll be next week. And there is a little surprise announcement here. But to the best of my knowledge, Michael Connelly is going to join us on Zoom the second half of the time. And he's willing to answer questions.
Wow.
7:15 he's coming on.
So that's something to look forward to. And I think the questions are, people on Zoom, I think the questions will be mostly for you. And I'm going to hog that and ask the first question. But that's the only one. The rest is up to you. So if you think they're good questions, if you would like to have the master himself, Michael Connelly. All right, now to begin with, in this first section, we'll have a break for a bit. I want to begin by talking about the novel.
You got a beer this time, but you didn't nothing.
The early novel. I am not a scholar of detective stories. There's a world of there's so many books about detective stories. And when I spoke to people, I said, well, I'm doing Michael Connelly, he did this and that. And they said, oh no, Agatha Christie did that long ago and so on. But I think I know enough of the second part of the morning. This one is to give a brief history of the detective novel leading up to Michael Connelly and station him where he is, and then I'll do a bit of biography. All right, well, to the novel itself, my stepdaughter says, don't ask Bill questions, he'll go back to the Big Bang. But I want so I want to start with literature. And literature has come down to us in three main sources or categories: poetry, drama, and prose. And poetry, drama foreshadowed prose for thousands of years. It's kind of before its sister. It's a great works, not in prose usually, as far as I know. But what happened in the 18th century, in which there were so many amazing things happening, really the beginning of modernism. It's where wealth changed from land to money, and all the the Enlightenment, all these things that you know. So one of the great events, I just imagine this, for 2,000 years, literature centered on what I would call the prince and the aristocracy, or great conquerors, or great heroes, and sometimes great knights and so on. But that was where literature for everybody concentrated. That was normative, was the world of the prince. And one of the many incredible, or not incredible, but amazing transformations in the 18th century was that the literary gaze changed from the prince to the gentleman. And writers at the time were aware of this feeling, I think, Martin. He said, we're going to write books not about great men, but about good men. So this transference put the gentleman is part of the gentry. And in England, I'll be talking about English now, primarily for a minute or two. But the gentry in England was a class of people consisting of baronets, knights, and squires. And they were between the aristocracy, the lords, and the common people, or the middle class, actually, or the commoners. And that interest in the gentleman dominates the English novel and eventually the later American novel. Well, in almost all through the 19th century, every novel we looked at it, but Trollope was centered on the gentleman. Trollope himself was very aware because he was noisy and so on, made a lot of noise in company. He was afraid people wouldn't know that he was a gentleman. So the gentleman is a key figure, and it goes up. I mean, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Anne Patchett, this idea of the gentry, of the upper, in America, be the upper middle class. But that is a dominant notion in the whole history of the novel, and I think it plays a role in the detective novel as well. Now, the consciousness of the novel as something new came through Samuel Richardson's book, Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded, 1740. And people claimed that he had a new species of writing, and that Richardson was compared to Homer. And a Frenchman wanted to come to England and kiss the pen that created these books. And they didn't have a name for it. Dr. Johnson called them the modern romance. Fielding, as always a joker, called it the comic epic poem in prose. That was his idea of it. But it didn't even have a proper name. It was only in the 1770s or 80s that it got the name novel. But anyhow, it was a new thing. And of course, in Pamela, it's very interesting. Pamela is an epic, it's a full-length, what we call novel, about a chambermaid who the young man, the son of the lady for which she's the chambermaid, is trying to seduce her, and eventually attempts an actual rape, which he survives all of this, and finally he marries her, and of course elevates her immediately into the gentry. And there was a follow-up called Pamela II, in which Pamela became a teacher to all the young ladies in the neighborhood about morals and so on. But Richardson's masterpiece is called Clarissa, and it is the greatest unread English novel. It is longer than the Bible, and the Everman edition takes 4 volumes. But believe me, if you love novels, it is very great. And it's also about rape. What happened with the first generation of these novels, they were crime, and the crime was almost always rape. And this is the beginning of feminism begins here. And of course, the rape is usually attempted by an aristocrat. So here is the gentry, and the first magazine in English history was called The Gentleman, came out in 1731. So that's that. Now, so the novel begins as a kind of new thing. And of course, there are earlier novels, of course, going right back to Don Quixote. But Pamela was, in terms, if you remember my course in the film noir, it was Double Indemnity, 1944, that made people conscious that Hollywood had a new genre. There are earlier film noirs, but it was that film that made Hollywood, they call them red-blooded crime movies. Well, Pamela was that to the novel. Pamela was the one that made people realize we've got a new genre. Now, the novel clearly flourished. It was the promised land to women authors because it was basically domestic. Lionel Trilling, great critic at Columbia, thought for the novel, said it was morals, manners, and money. That's what but it opened up a great promised land for women writers. First, the great one was Fanny Burney, followed by Jane Austen, on to the present day. It's a very great thing happened there. Now, so the novel had been going on for 100 years before we got a detective novel. And in that 100 years, prose fiction or the novel had completely eclipsed poetry and the drama, and it ever since has become the dominant form of literature. The others exist, of course, there are many great examples, but the dominant type of literature is the novel in the 19th and 20th century. Okay, now the first detective novel was created by our own Edgar Allan Poe. And to this day, the Mystery Writers of America offer the prize, the Edgar it's called, to the best first novel by a new crime writer. And our dear friend Michael Connelly won that with his first novel in 1992, Black.
I can't hear a word.
Well deserved. It's a wonderful novel, first one. So, what was the innovation? Is the creation of a character. It was 1841. The name of the book, you may have read it in high school or something. The Murders in the Rue Morgue is the name of it.
I can't understand what you're saying.
It begins with a narrator who's a friend of Arsène Dupin, who is a kind of very eccentric man, and he's very disappointed with contemporary culture because they don't use method clearly enough. And if you use method and really think things through, you can solve almost anything. So he hears about the crime in the Rue Morgue, and he figures out the whole thing. It was done by an orangutan. And
Are we talking about Poe? Orangutan.
I always thought orangutans were very calm, nice, like mountain gorillas or something. You'd sit with them and chat. I didn't know that they were murderers, but anyhow, Poe has this thing up. But Dupin isn't going to turn this tailor. He feels sorry for this tailor. He's not going to turn him into the police. But he says, I give you my word as a gentleman and Frenchman, I will not turn you over to the police. So Poe wrote two more detective novels in The Mystery of Marie Roget and also The Purloined Letter. Now, Poe, unfortunately, died at age 40, 1849. Now, not much happened in terms, as far as I know. But this is as far as I know. Not much happened in terms of a Dupin-like creation of a detective, except perhaps in two of Wilkie Collins' novels. Wilkie Collins was a great friend of Charles Dickens and a popular Victorian novelist. And he has two very good novels, The Woman in White and The Moonstone. And in both of them, there's an appearance, not of a main character, but is helpful, a detective, sleuth, genius. But it's not about him. So it's not until the Colossus appears, namely Sherlock Holmes, in 1887, with A Study in Scarlet, was the first Conan Doyle Sherlock Jones novel. And that was followed by three other novels and I think 66 or 67 short stories. And that really established, that's the default thing on detective novels. And of course, Holmes is also a gentleman. He's not a policeman. He is a gentleman. But that began the whole world of the super sleuth, which has been, the great creation. And he wrote for at least 20 years. At one point, he had Professor Moriarty killed Holmes on the falls of the Rhine. There was a huge outcry, an international outcry. And they forced going to continue. So he wrote 30 more of these stuff. So that, so American actor William Gillette made in London and Broadway, played Sherlock Holmes and made a fortune. If you're in Connecticut, there's a wonderful Gillette house you can visit. It's kind of a mystery house that he established from great money he made playing Sherlock.
Before Razzle Backbone.
Before, yeah, my Sherlock Holmes is Basil Rathbone, but that was later. But the actually Charlie Chaplin played as a little young boy, played in Gillette's production in London. That was early on. Anyhow, but Holmes is followed in 1920 by the great Agatha Christie, who wrote no less than 66 novels and numerous plays and Lord knows what else. She was amazing. She's sort of like Michael Connelly in terms of production. And in her first novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, she introduced Hercule Poirot, a Belgian detective who was really Sherlock Holmes speaking French. Because he is very concerned with method. It's method that counts. And of course, he's a gentleman and a part sort of above. He helps people solve the problem. When people come to Holmes and ask for help, but he's independent. And Hercule Poirot is also, he happens to be, the novel is placed in what was called the Great War. And Poirot was a Belgian refugee living in Styles at the time, but famous already in the continent. So now then we get a whole stream of famous detectives. I think Charlie Chan began in the mid-20s. He was followed in America by Philo Vance. I don't remember him or not. A lot of movies made in the early 30s by Philo Vance. William Powell played the first one, and Warren William, very, very popular. The author's name, pen name was S.S. Van Dyne. That was his real name, was Wilbur Wright. But S.S. Van Dyne was outselling Fitzgerald and Hemingway with the Philo Vance and Scribner's, published by Scribner's. So that was a big hit. And then it went on to Ellery Queen, Perry Mason, Mr. Moto, Falcon. They were all modeled after Sherlock Holmes. They were super sleuths. Now, what happened then, another amazing, important, I shouldn't say but important, well, it's amazing, innovation by a writer named Dashiell Hammett. And he was a Pinkerton detective early on. And he started writing kind of pulp fiction in the Black Mask, I think, was the main pulp fiction magazine. And he created a character called the Continental Op. Continental was the detective, it was like the Pinkertons, but the company was called the Continental, and he was the operator. And he's kind of a rough guy, not the usual gentleman. All the detectives I've been naming up to this were all gentlemen themselves, and the detectives were gentlemen also. Interesting, I think. So that blossomed into a detective named Sam Spade. Was serialized in the Black Mask, the Maltese Falcon, and that was published in 1929. And Sam Spade is the anti-Sherlock Holmes. He is not a gentleman. And more than that, he's very involved, and this is entirely new, he's involved with the crooks. He is a former police detective going to a private eye, and its business is not that successful. And he has a partner named Miles Archer. And the novel begins with, in the office of Spade. I should mention that Spade is having an affair with Archer's wife. This is not Eric Poirot. So when the Miss Wonderly, later Bridget O'Shaughnessy, comes in and asks for help, Archer is there with Spade, and she's going to leave, and she's leaving. Archer remarks, he said, well, I'm going to have her first. Now, can you imagine, women often come to Baker Street, seek out Sherlock Holmes. But can you imagine when one of these Victorian women leave and Watson says, I'm going to have her first. This is Sam Spade. So Miles Archer is killed. And you may know, last time I was there, he was killed off of Bush Street down from Stockton. And I think San Francisco has a plaque in the wall of the place where Miles Archer was killed. And so as the case goes on, Sam Spade has an affair with Bridget O'Shaughnessy. And then, as the case continues, he figures out that she was the one who killed Miles Archer. He still has an affair with her. At the end, he turns her into the cops. You know, it plays a tough guy. This is not the classic Sherlock Holmes detective. This is a new twist on the whole idea of detectives. Now, during the 30s, and by the way, Hammett wrote another detective novel called The Thin Man, which is not about it, not anything like Sam Spade. Nick and Nora Charles are two alcoholics who are sort of comical marital couple. That was serialized, I think, in Red Book in 1934, and made into a big hit movie with William Powell and Myrna Loy. It had 6 sequels, but Hammett did not write them. He didn't write anything after 1934, and he died in the 1960 something. He was a chronic alcoholic, and he was living with his mistress, Lillian Hellman, who really supported him at the end of his life. But he did start something. Now, he was in the 30s. He wasn't taken up. People didn't. Hollywood writers, Perry Mason, didn't start to be tough guys or anything. The writer who took up what Hammett had achieved was Raymond Chandler. And Raymond Chandler was an oil executive. He was 51 years old. He had published a couple of stories in Pulp magazine, but in 1939, his first book appeared called The Big Sleep. And his detective's name is Philip Marlowe. And Philip Marlowe is on the level. He's down in the crime world, in the fallen world of Los Angeles. Spade was in San Francisco, is Los Angeles, and he has Los Angeles, but he also has an adjunct to Los Angeles called Bay City. I don't know whether that's Long Beach or Malibu or whatever that is, but it's not. It's a kind of imaginary place. But it's very interesting that both Spade and Marlowe were introduced big time on the screen by Humphrey Bogart. Very interesting. The Maltese Falcon, When You Know and Love, is directed and written by John Huston, son of the actor Walter Huston. And Warner Brothers had made the film twice before. The first one was somewhat similar. Started, I think, with Court of Cortez. But the second one, they did it as a kind of screwball comedy. It's called Satan Met a Lady. It's one of the worst movies ever made. So they didn't really get Sam Spade right until the third version of the film. Usually later versions are worse than the original, but just the opposite. And I'll make a confession to you. I can tell you sometime about Park Slope, which I'm the only one who knows the law. But the law is that the best movies are made from second-rate, by original screenplays or or lower literary sources. And I just reread Maltese Falcon, and I really think that the movie is better. For one thing, Humphrey Bogart is a much more agreeable person than Sam Spade. Anyhow, it's a famous book and a historic book. It's worth reading, and it's of course worth watching as a movie. Well, Chandler then went on to write 8 more novels. And what he did with Philip Marlowe, and he's described as a kind of a white knight in this fallen world in which he exists. And it is, now this is where Michael Connelly comes in. As a young man, and he writes about this in his movie called Crime Beat. This is a book of Connelly's, an anthology of his reporting, his crime reporting. And it's very much worth reading. These are actual newspaper accounts of crime scenes. But and if you listen to it on Audible, Connelly is the voice. It's the introduction of book, does his own, and he talks about his life. He was born in Philadelphia, like me, and as a young boy, he moved to Florida. And that's the last connection we have. Except that he was born on July 21st, as was my mother and my grandson here. And that is also Hemingway's birth. So as a boy, 16 years old in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, he became a kind of witness of an ongoing crime scene. Somebody's running seemingly from the cops. He pushes something in the bushes and he runs into a bar, I think it's called the Parrot, which was a biker in the bar. He's a man with a beard. So he didn't know what to do. He followed the guy to where he was running to. And then I think he called his dad and asked him what he should do. And the dad said, well, tell the police. And so the police, then they got in the bar and they put people in lineup and they wanted Connelly, the teenager, to pick out the criminal. And he said, it's none of these guys. And this tough cop didn't believe him. Thought he was lying. He was afraid to finger the guy because he was afraid of consequences. And many years later, when Connelly was doing crime on the Fort Lauderdale newspaper, he got into crime. And there was this same detective. And the detective continued to think he was a liar. Anyhow, that was a turning point for him. He decided he really was interested in crime. His mother, evidently, was a big detective reader. It was the mother who went on. And at that point, he started reading Raymond Chandler, and he fell in love with it. And at that point, it was a turning point in his life. At 16, he decided he would really like to write mystery novels. So he went to, according to David Gaharin, he went to 4 different parochial schools, and he didn't like any of them. The final one was called St. Augustine Academy. He graduated from there, and then went to the University of Florida in Gainesville, and began courses in economics. His father was a developer, businessman, developer. Connelly, I think, was the second of 6 children, and he wanted to do right. He signed up for an economics major kind of thing. He didn't like it, and he dropped out. And maybe you could ask him this, but as far as I understand, he didn't go back to Fort Lauderdale. He hung around Gainesville with odd jobs, and decided that he would start again. There was a novelist in the creative writing department. Maybe he was the creative writer. Named Harry. What's his last name? Harry Cruz. Harry Cruz, a novelist. He wrote 17 novels. He was the creative writer teaching. And Connelly liked him very much. So after a year or two, he went back to the University of Florida and majored in journalism and creative writing. So he was in 1924 when he graduated. And in the meantime, he met his wife, Linda, there, and I believe they're still married. And Linda's maiden name was McAvoy. And if you finished it, the journalist. Of course, he is a journalist, so he's given McAvoy his wife's maiden name. So it's interesting. And I think McCallum was his mother's maiden. So he first got a job in Daytona Beach newspaper, a smaller town, and then got a job in Fort Lauderdale. And one of his crime things was a runner-up for a Pulitzer Prize. And he was getting some fame as a crime writer, journalist. And he decided he would go to the home of what he thought were the great detective stories of Marlowe and Joseph Wambaugh and someone who was reading them. He decided he wanted to go to LA. He got a job right away on the Los Angeles Times. And he worked on the Los Angeles Times for more than 5 years. Evidently, he wrote 2 novels. This is a question you could ask him. I don't know what happened to them. I don't know whether he's kept them or not. I know for scholars in the future, what would that be a dish to get those 2 unpublished novels? But he decided, evidently, according to Cajon, he didn't think them. I don't know whether he tried to get them published and couldn't, or he just decided they weren't good enough. But he finally wrote the Black Echo in 1992. He's now 36 years old. And but what he's up against now in 1992, The Big Sleep was 1939. So, and Raymond Chandler had been much imitated this by Ross MacDonald, by Robert Parker, and it had gone international. I think there are Wallander, there are Swedish guys, or I know there's an Icelandic people, Japanese. This idea of not Sherlock Holmes, but the hard-boiled detective had become an enormous convention. And typically, this hard-boiled detective, he was an ex-cop or unhappy cop. He was usually middle-aged. He had a bad marriage, had trouble with his wife's successive husband. He seems mostly to have a daughter who he like or hate. He drinks a lot and smokes a lot. And he's a wise guy. You know, he talks back, especially to the police, things on. Now, this is an iron now, or this is the stereotype of a novelist. So Connelly, as a young novelist, just latches onto this. And one of the reasons that he called his character Harry, Hieronymus would be Jerome, would be Jerry Bosch, or something like that. But he called his Harry because he so admired the movies of Dirty Harry with Clint Eastwood. It was sort of the same type of guy. And he also admired Harry Cruz, his teacher. And he also admired the Gene Hackman character. His first name is Harry in the movie The Conversation. These were all famous things. So that, according to Cajon, that's why he gave his character the name Harry. So he's a young man, is a young novelist, and he latches himself onto a rigid convention, which I think, now, this is part of the trouble with detective novels. To the best of my knowledge, no detective novelist ever won the Nobel Prize or the Pulitzer Prize. The detective novels, as I grew up, were kind of lowbrow things that you read in the summer when you know that they are not serious literature, because they are conventional and because they have happy endings. And so the they're widely read, but they've never been put up for the, you know, the triumphal award that you might suggest. I would have given the Nobel Prize to Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie in a minute if I run the hotel. They're great writers, but they're sort of a little bit. Now here's a young novelist who decides to not to be creative, but be imitative. The detective novels don't get credit so much for their imagination. Now, I want to dispute that. I mean, I think we make, and so now, almost all novels are crime novels. You look on the New York Times bestseller, 9 out of 10 are crime novels or detective novels. It has dominated, detective novels now dominate our literary production. This is something that has happened. This wasn't the case in the 1930s. But I think that literature depends on conventions. And one of my favorite 18th century poets, Alexander Pope, had a line in the literature, what often said, but ne'er so well expressed. And I think that's the key. So I compare Michael Connelly to John Ford. People will say, well, he's not interesting. He only makes Westerns. But and a deeply conventional genre, the Westerns, everything is fixed. But Ford used that. And two of his films, I think, are two of the greatest films ever made and the deepest films ever made. One of them is called The Searchers. The last time around was number 17 in the British Film Institute list of great films. And the other is My Darling Clementine. One, My Darling Clementine, dealing with the difficulties of what goes on between the idea of law and violence. The whole movie is about that and goes into it deeply. And the same with The Searchers is a profound movie about race and the tragedies of racial discriminations. And they are deeply conventional. So I am not, and what I admire about Michael Connelly is I think he does more with a detective novel than in my limited experience, any other detective novels I've ever read. I really believe he surpasses Raymond Chandler, his mentor. So I think I'm going to stop right now. What time is it?
45.
You got time, he's coming on in half an hour, so we have time.
Well, let's
Take 10 more minutes there, because then you have a 10-minute break.
all right.
Can you
Well,
talk
I'll
about
start part two. Wait, no. So start then with his achievement. Start with the idea of Harry Bosch. Now, I've been told that other detective, pardon?
Is there any way to get more volume?
I think you're gonna move it further back, but it's right in front of you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
No, it's struggle to reach.
I don't know what we're getting.
I'm gonna move the camera.
Anyhow,
So it's not
his
sideways.
achievement of Harry Bosch, of his 41 or so novels. There's another one coming out in May. He's got a new detective called, what's his name? Stillwell, a detective on Catalina Island. And he's got a new one coming out. He's also created Renee Ballard, female cop. And he's got his half brother, Harry, Mickey Howard. And he's got Joe McAvoy. There's 3 Joe McAvoy columns, The Scarecrow. What's the other one? There's a fair warning. And the poet. The poet are all McAvoy novels. And then you have the 7 or 8 Mickey Howard novels. And I think there are 3 or 4 already Ballard novels. So and now he's got this new story. He's got these other characters. So in this world that he has created, start with Harry Bosch. Harry Bosch appears in the Black Echo He's 40, I think he's 42 years old. He's been on the force for 20 years. And he's got a history on trouble. Actually, there was a movie made, not named, from one of his cases. And from the money he got on that case, he wanted to build his stilted house on Woodrow up near Mulholland Drive. From the money. So all that has appeared earlier, and he has a history of this. So the novels then go on. Each novel is in time. So the novel takes place in the contemporary world, whether it's OJ or the Menendez trials or the Los Angeles riots or strange new laws for the police department. They follow each year. And Harry, of course, gets older. So in the last one called Awakening, he's now 72, is in remission with terminal cancer. And I don't know how, I don't want him to die. But he's now an old man, and he latched on with Ballard, sort of helping her. But you go through his life so you read all these novels, the 25 of them, you're really reading the biography of Harry Bosch and how he changes and what motivates him. He's a character that is in depth. So you follow him. And then, of course, these other characters come. And the other thing is his treatment of Los Angeles. That is so specific. Every street, I don't know whether the houses are there or not, but all the restaurants he refers to are, for the most part, real restaurants. And he has real police characters. And he has like, his brother, Mickey Haller. Mickey Haller, the first Mickey Haller novel is the car,
Lincoln Lawyer.
What?
The Lincoln Lawyer.
The Lincoln Lawyer with Matthew McConaughey is the star, and so Haller is often talking to him, and he gets the character in the novel. So he's appealing to real people, and another movie that was made with Clint Eastwood is what's it called? Blood Work is with Clint Eastwood playing a detective, and that was made in the movie with Clint Eastwood. That's the part of the movie. I think it's called. Is it called Blood Work? Pardon?
Burning Room.
No, it's not the Burning. It's called. It'll come. The Clint Eastwood and the detective. What's his name?
Haller.
His last name, Haller.
Mickey Haller.
The detective has a sidekick who is played in the movie. The movie has a sidekick, and the sidekick in the movie is very upset because Clint Eastwood, when he made this Blood Work, I think it's called, movie, he made this sidekick of the detective the villain. She wasn't in the novel, and so the sidekick is constantly complaining about the movie and what Clint Eastwood has done to him. So he has the novels are all placed in the real world, in an extraordinary association between the novel and reality. And what happens, I think, in in that association of, of so much detail, all the streets, all the characters, and the real characters and the in life and the imaginary characters have an interplay in the novels. So he has created, it's just not, I don't know anything that's quite, it's like Faulkner Toffler, or it's really like Trollope's novels, in which the characters are so placed in the world, and then they grow through the novel over the series. They grow in time, like the 6 novels about the prime minister. So this is the same thing that Michael Connelly is doing. He's created this world, or like Faulkner, Dr. Toffa County, but there's this world that he's created. Now, but the thing is, Dr. Toffa County in Faulkner is a place, just like Barchester in Trollope's novels, is an imaginary county in England. Dr. Toffa is an imaginary county in Mississippi. But what Connelly has done is to make Los Angeles a complete world of its own. Where there's not any distinction between reality and fiction. I don't know anything like that. He's created this world of Los Angeles, which becomes a world of fiction. And I think that's such an extraordinary achievement. That the novel, which is realistic, is turned into fiction, and the fiction and reality are so close together. I don't know anybody else who's melded that closely together. It's a great achievement. So that Los Angeles becomes a world itself, and all the details of the reality add to the fiction of the fictional creation of a whole world. I think it's an amazing achievement. It does in that way. So I'm going to stop here now. Let's take a break. And wait a minute. Did I tell you the big event?
Yes.
Life? What's going to happen? His half brother, and he thinks that Harry is a jerk because he's so honest, and he won't cut corners. And of course, it's very dangerous. And we'll get into it's part of the novel the first novel you're reading, More Than Darkness. Is as he crossed the line, which wouldn't bother Mickey Haller at all, because he does that, and Mickey Haller doesn't really believe in justice. He believes in winning. They're opposites, very much opposite in that way. So it's an interesting contrast between the two of them. All those novels, all the novels are terrific. Of the 40-some novels, I don't think there's a single bad one. One of them called The Overlook. He wrote some contest or some thing that the New York Times had going, where I think they asked 4 or 5 detective novelists to write a serial novel. So he's writing that like Dickens used to write. He's writing a serial novel week by week, and so it's a very simple. I think he expanded a little bit when it was published, apart from the New York Times. But all the novels are extremely. I think every single one of them is a good read. I mean, even that Overlook. The thing about the Overlook is just simpler than other books. Really, it's just a simple. So, anyhow, so let me have some questions here about the work that you have sort of about so what you've read. Have you all Is there anybody here who has not read a Michael Connelly novel before? You know, it's like me. I came to this very late, and I liked this the novel so much it pulled me out of retirement. I didn't think I would do it. I said, this has to be, and I'm like a fool. And I say, I don't think I told you about my cousin. I didn't mention Vanessa in Munich. I called her and was talking to her, and I said, "Oh boy, I just, it's like somebody saying, hey guys, there's this great 19th century novelist named Dickens. You should really catch it." So I said this to my cousin Vanessa. I said, "I'm reading have you ever heard of Michael Connelly?" "Oh, yes," she said. Her father was a Hollywood editor, my cousin Murray, and he was the original editor on the Cops show. And he rose to be the producer of the show until he was arrested for drunk driving. They were filming the show and he lost his job. But Murray was a very good Hollywood editor. And she said, Dad loved him and so on. And she said, of course. And my husband, Christoph, and I, when we went to visit my mother in Mar Vista, we made a pilgrimage to the Harry Bosch house that's used in the TV series. So I felt sort of foolish. So people, anyway, that's where. So are there any questions? I can't quite see from somebody's tough. I can't see the hands. Somebody help me with this.
Yeah. Can you ask the question loud?
Pardon me.
Give the volume.
Oh, excuse me.
Yes.
Four score and seven. Moving along, when you talk about novels that take place in Los Angeles, Walter Mosley and his character is wrong.
I can't think of anything. I might have. Well,
Los Angeles about 40 miles.
I've
a 17-year-old. But do you have an opinion on how he places his character in that kind of?
Well, I think I've only read one or two of the Mosley novels, and I don't know him well enough. I admire him, and they made a good movie with Denzel Washington.
No.
It's a very, very good movie. I don't know him well enough. I don't know whether he creates this whole world in such detail of every restaurant, every street. So you're living, it's like you're living there, and yet the fiction, which is he interacts all the time, and he makes it into a kind of Yakima County, but it's a real county. It's just to me, it's a great achievement that he turns into Los Angeles as a fictional city. It's a great triumph of art. So much of detective novels are the realist novels based on realism. One of the things about Pamela and the novels, and Fielding talks about this, he's not going to have what he calls the marvelous. Tom Jones is in the hands of fortune, and whatever happens to him, Fielding's just going to let it go. He's not going to intervene. There's not going to be any marvelous, any divine intervention. And that's one of the big changes, actually, in the novel. It begins as a completely secular work. Pamela is a very religious girl, but there are no ghosts or no visions or no miracles at all in those novels. So the novels are very realistic, but I don't know that anyone has turned a city like that into a world the way he does.
Michael Connelly stuff, Bill.
Michael Connelly?
Yes.
Welcome.
Hey.
Hear me tell me what's up. Welcome to you, Michael Connelly. So glad to be with you.
Glad to be here.
We're opening this up for questions, but I'm insisting on having the first question. It's this. Are you ready?
I think so.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is that yes?
Yes.
I want to know when you made up your mind to call your character Hieronymus Bosch, where you got that idea from. Was it an art history course at the University of Florida? Where did you get the idea of Hieronymus Bosch and give your great detective that name?
Well, as you said, I just by happenstance, I studied the painter Hieronymus Bosch when I was at the University of Florida in the 1970s. And obviously, pre-internet, he was a very obscure figure. It wasn't like you could type his name into Google and learn about him. So it was obscure but fascinating, dark stuff, wages of sin, good and bad, good and evil. So that's the background on the painter. So many years later, I'm writing a book, and I've learned through reading, and the books that influenced me, the crime novels I loved, revolved around character first, and so the lesson there was, never miss a chance to say something about character. So a name that had like some kind of metaphoric meaning is important. And I experimented with a few different names at first when I was writing early drafts of the first, what would become the Bosch novel. I remember one name that I used a lot was Pierce. And that was because Raymond Chandler had written an essay called The Simple Art of Murder about writing private detective novels. And he said that the detective had to be able to pierce all levels of society, all veils. And by virtue of being a investigator, they can go anywhere in society. So I was calling him Pierce for the first draft. And then I always forget this because who knew it would last, but something reminded me, maybe my wife or somebody reminded me of the work of Hieronymus Bosch, and then it kind of hit me that if I use that name, there would be some people who would understand the metaphor I was dealing with, which is a crime scene is often a parable on good and wrong, good and evil, right and wrong, things going sideways. Um, Bosch's most famous painting is the Garden of Earthly Delights, and I saw a metaphoric quality of Los Angeles being a modern Garden of Earthly Delights with great, wonderful things and really terrible things, a mixture. So I was just going for those kind of feelings in the character, and so I went with Bosch, Harry for short. I found out later one time I went on a book tour in Holland where Bosch, the original Bosch, the painter, was Flemish, was from that area. And the journalists who interviewed me, every one of them reminded me that Hieronymus is the Latin root of the name Jerome, and so therefore he should have been called Jerry, not Harry. And I didn't think that had the as good a ring as Harry Bosch, so I'm glad I made that mistake.
All right, with some more questions here.
Eric?
Just speak, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. When you first wrote your first Harry Bosch book, did you have his whole life arc figured out, or how much of his emotional development and health, family, all of that when you first started?
No, I didn't have. I mean, it would be very presumptuous of me to think I was even going to get the book published, let alone many others. So, and I had not been published. This was my first novel. So I kind of threw everything in but the kitchen sink. I put everything I knew about him, and I held back, or didn't really hold it back, but I had this idea that if this gets published and they let me do a second book, then he would solve his mother's murder in the second book. And, because that you talked about the emotional setup, that's the motivation of him being a detective, what happened to him as a 11-year-old losing his mother, an unresolved murder case. So that's really all I had. And then I got the book published, and it was like a one book deal. It didn't do that great, but it got a lot of critical success and won some awards. So my publisher came back and wanted to make a two book deal for two more Harry Bosch books, which was like an amazing moment in my life. And my editor said, "So what's the next one going to be about?" And I said, "Well, he's going to solve his mother's murder." And he goes, "No, you're not. No, he's not." He said, "That is the motivating thing of his life. You got that part right, but you got to stretch that out. Don't do that right away. Hold that back." And so I did hold it back till the fourth book. And that I thought that was good advice from my editor.
Okay.
When you write in solitude, do you have a certain routine where you get inspired more than other types of routines?
Yeah, to a great extent. I'm a morning person. I really like to get up early. To me, a perfect day starts in darkness. I like to be up and writing before the sun comes up. And it's very solitary at that time. It's very creative at that time. And then there's this psychological thing where I feel like, hey, I'm getting stuff done before the world even wakes up. So, like a good day for me is being with my laptop by 5:30 or 6 in the morning and going till if I can go to 11 or go to lunchtime, that usually means I've had a good day. I'm involved in some of the TV adaptations of my books, and so I try to do what I have to do in regard to those projects in the afternoons. But the mornings I try to keep pretty sacred.
Question from the Zoom. Is that okay, Bill? Yeah. Quick question, Michael, is that did you get some of your stories from actual LAPD detectives?
Yeah, I do. I have. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. My first four Bosch books, I was still a newspaper reporter, and I was covering the LAPD, and I was talking to maybe 100 or so detectives a week. And then I made the choice to be a full-time novelist so I could possibly be the best novelist I could be. And so I kind of retained some detectives, almost all of them homicide detectives, to help me. And when I wasn't a reporter, I wasn't a threat to them. When I was working for the LA Times covering the LAPD, and there was either a spoken or unspoken, in some cases, bargain or understanding that, we're friends. I'm going to be as accurate as I possibly can be in writing newspaper stories. But, the example I always use is I knew some of the cops that were on the Rodney King tape, and I had to write about that. And I lost them as friends and sources. But that was my job. And so as soon as I quit being a reporter and whatever they told me wasn't going to end up in a newspaper article, it would end up possibly in a work of fiction, the doors really swung open for me. And I got a lot more what I was looking for, which is what this kind of work does to someone and what it takes to do it. I got more of that emotion and personal stories once I was no longer a newspaper reporter. And but I've been very lucky, and I've been writing about Harry Bosch now for over 3 decades. So those people that I started out of the gate with, they're long retired, and some are even dead by now. And so I've had to renew my cadre, I call it. I don't need a lot of people, but like 3 or 4 detectives who are kind of diverse in either one for examples of women, so I can get different points of view on the same thing, which is solving a murder, for example. And so I've had to renew my cadre a few times. But, I went to, or I endeavor for, for the coin of the realm for me, be a high degree of accuracy. And I'm not just talking about procedure and law and rules. I'm talking about what it takes to do this. I think the essential thing that I'm writing about when it comes to like Harry Bosch or Renee Ballard is what this work does to you inside. You basically work in a world of human darkness where people do unbelievably savage and awful things to each other. And that's your job to see that every day. And it's got to do something to you. And, that darkness has to seep into you or sneak into you in some way. And then you got to figure out how to keep it from becoming a cancer or a corruption. And that's what I get from the cadre. I talk to them about like, how did you keep yourself safe? And then all the other stuff flows from that. Like, what do you do at a crime scene, or what do you do here on this kind of investigation? That's the easy stuff. The harder stuff is the character stuff.
I'm wondering what your inspiration for the Lincoln Lawyer was.
I have my own legal cadre too. But that's kind of a funny story that I was at a Dodger baseball game and sitting next to a guy who was a stranger, but he was wearing a shirt and tie. It was a day game on. It was actually an opening game of the season.
These two do you want to do?
Sorry.
Hiking, the second half day hiking, yeah. Thanks.
Trying to mute people. Okay.
Very tough, very tough, very tough.
There you go.
Tricia.
Anyway, so I was at the game and this guy was wearing a tie at a baseball game, and it was like a weekday day game. And but I knew he was like playing hooky from work, or he was going to go to work after the game. And so I asked him, and so I started talking to him, and turned out he was a criminal defense lawyer. I had covered courts for the paper, so I knew something about where courthouses were. There's a lot of courthouses in LA County, 40 courthouses. So I asked him where his office was, because that would tell me what courthouses he specialized in. And that's when he said, "Oh, I work out of my car." And I became intrigued, and he told me how he did it, and that he used as a driver a client who couldn't pay his bills, so he worked it off by driving him. So a couple of the key things that were trademarks of the Lincoln Lawyer, I got at a baseball game, and but I sat on the idea for almost 5 years, while I slowly did some here and there, and sitting in courtrooms, following my college roommate ended up being a criminal defense attorney, so I reconnected with him and was a fly on the wall in his office and on his cases in court and so forth, interviews with clients, all that kind of stuff. I did that sporadically over 5 years before I wrote the book, The Lincoln Lawyer.
I was coincidentally watching Bosch Legacy and rereading the novel. It turned out to be the same one. And in the streaming, Honey Chandler is pulled over by crooked cops. But in the book, it's not Honey who's pulled over. It's Harry. And harassed by the cops, Mickey, harassed by the cops so that they can get into the trunk of the car and get the information you want. I'm sure you must have been part of changing the script that way. I was wondering if that's an okay thing with you. It just cracked me up that I have they were overlapping.
Yeah, I'm involved in a lot of that. I'm not sure what I mean, I don't remember in any book Honey Chandler getting pulled over by the cops, but um, things, in the adaptation process, things happen all the time in terms of having to change things, because you're going from a written story to a visual. And the other thing is in my books, you're almost solely in the mind or writing with the main character. And you just can't do that in a TV show. They film these shows 12 to 16 hour a day. So I couldn't have like Titus Welliver working every hour of every day. So you have to build other stories and you got to give characters more life than they have in the books. And I've really benefited from that because I think the expansion of these characters in the shows has been fantastic. I mean, if you look at the Bosch show, Crate and Barrel were in one of my books, and they were jerks. They were internal affairs guys, and that were kind of uh, anti-Bosch. And so the creative head of a show is called the showrunner. So our showrunner said, "I want to use that Crate and Barrel. I think that's kind of funny, but I want them to be comic relief because you need it in dark stories." And so those guys, I think they were in 56 episodes. Every time they're on screen, they're funny. And that's not the way they are in the book, but I got credit for it. Everyone thinks I created these funny guys, Crate and Barrel. But that's TV in a nutshell. You can't be 100% reliant on what is in the books. You got to be able to expand. I can give you so many examples. Somebody just mentioned Honey Chandler. She's in one book and she gets killed, and on the show she was in 10 seasons. So and that was a great move to keep her as a steady character because we had a really good actress and a really good role. But again, that's not what's in the books. So the books are often just a framework with a center character that is as close to the characters in the book as we can make it.
I have a question. Titus Welliver is such a wonderful actor and such a great character. How close is he to what you imagined Harry Bosch to be? That's my question.
Physically, not so much. But I had a big hand in casting him. The books are very internal. Harry does a lot of brooding. He carries a lot of baggage. And you get a lot of that in the books through his thought processes, but all that goes out the window when you're writing a script or making a TV show. You can't say what someone's thinking. So early on, the showrunner, Eric Overmyer, who just passed away, by the way, very sad, he said, this is our challenge to find a Harry Bosch, to find someone who can somehow portray he's got stuff inside behind his eyes. He's got baggage. Bad stuff has happened to him. And he can never say that. He can never say, "Oh, I have PTSD." He can never say bad stuff has happened to me. We got to find a guy that can portray that. And I had just happened to watch a show that didn't last long. It was called Touch with Kiefer Sutherland. It was like his follow-up to 24. And I think it got canceled pretty quickly. But the first two episodes of the new show, Touch, had Titus Welliver as a guest star as a former military guy who has PTSD and is being treated for it. And I could just tell he had something behind his eyes. He had this sadness. He had this burden. He had all these things that I would attribute to Bosch. So in our very first meetings, I mentioned Titus Welliver, and he at that time he was making a movie in China, and our casting director said, great actor, but we can't get him. He's making a movie for the next 3 months, and everything about TV is very scheduled. It might not seem that way from the outside, but we had 45 days to find Bosch, and if we didn't find him in that time, it would knock off our schedule and make us possibly vulnerable to getting canceled before we even started. Because Amazon had certain shows they wanted to get going, and they were all on schedules, and we were fit in the spot. And so we proceeded to audition and talk to many, many actors over the next 45 days, and we couldn't find Harry Bosch. And so when we were desperate, we called Titus's agent and asked one more time, is there any chance we can, this was like before Zoom, obviously, that would have solved everything if we could have just Zoomed them in China. But because like the Lincoln Lawyer with Manuel, that was cast by Zoom because he was in Mexico and it was COVID, and we chose him after talking to him several times on Zoom. Anyway, going back to Titus, and they said, well, you may be in luck because he had to come back to see his kids under his custody agreement because he's divorced. And if he went X number of days without seeing his kids, he could lose his visitation rights. So he's coming back this weekend to spend it with his kids. And we were like, well, that's a really important thing, but is there any way we could talk to him for an hour? So they said yes. They set it up, and so he had a 14-hour flight back where he studied the script. He came in for 1 hour, did an audition, and he got the job on the spot. He was spot on right away. We all knew it. There's maybe 7 or 8 people in that room. And the media consensus was we found our Harry Bosch, and so he got the job that day.
Lovely story.
We have a question over here.
Could you talk about Harry's love of jazz and how you weave that in the novels and the TV shows?
Yeah, it's weird. You read a book and music is mentioned and you can't hear it, but yet it's very important. It's a character stroke. So what someone listens to and what they get from it, really important in delivering character to your reader. I didn't grow up as a jazz guy. My dad was, so I heard a lot of jazz in my house. But, sons have to reject their fathers at some point or on some level. And so I was more of a rock and roll guy. But when I was writing the first Harry Bosch book, my dad had terminal cancer, and I didn't think he'd ever live to see that I got published. But I gave Harry, my dad's music, and chose a lot of selections that my dad loved and played. And my dad he knew I was going to get published. I had a deal, but he passed before I actually could hand him a book, which was sad, but he knew it was going to happen. But then I didn't have him anymore. But I was a newspaper reporter, so I know how to ask questions and I know how to find people to go to. So I started, asking people and going to jazz clubs in LA and finding Harry Bosch's music. And in the process of that, I realized the love for jazz that my dad had. And now I would say I listen to that music more than anything.
Okay, question here. Have any of your characters been alter egos, or are they all third person?
The one I've written a few books about a newspaper reporter named Jack McAvoy, and those are autobiographical in worldview. I mean, in the books, Jack solves murders and does stuff I've never did as a reporter, but his view of being a police reporter or a crime reporter is definitely mine. And that's probably why there's only a few of those books, because I find it more fun and more fulfilling to write about a character quite different from me and to explore that character and do research on that character. When I write a Jack McAvoy book, it chops out a big part of the writing process, where if I write about Renee Ballard and there's a situation, I have to sit back and say, what would she do here? What would she say? What would it mean to her? And that's part of the stuff I love doing. With Jack McAvoy, I just wrote what I would think, what I would say, what I would get from it. And so it was a short circuiting of the writing process, and consequently, I think there's three Jack McAvoy books. They're the fastest I've ever written, those three books, because of that middle section of creativity is removed. So that's why there's only a few of those books, because I don't like that as much as figuring out the characters of people that are kind of wholly realized. Now, that doesn't mean they're not inspired by real people. Renee Ballard is totally inspired by one detective that I know, and who inspires me as a person. And so, of course, I was going to, at some point, want to write about a character like her. I knew her for a long time before I ever wrote about Renee Ballard, but the time was right when that happened.
I love how you have Los Angeles almost as a character, but as such an amazing setting. And I'm wondering if you do the restaurant scouting yourself.
Yeah. I mean, that's. I guess you can call that research. I know I write off the bills at the restaurants, but as research. So, but yeah, no, I mean, see, Harry Bosch. I talk in all my characters, but for sake of argument here, Harry Bosch is not a real person. But I feel the best way to connect him to the reader is to plant his fictional feet in as real world as possible. So I don't make up restaurants, and I don't make up streets, and I don't make up locations. I go to them all. It's what I call physical research, and I just feel, and every writer is going to be different. In my opinion, this is a way of making him feel real by putting him in real places. And what's been fun is that that's translated to the shows. And so, like Bosch and Bosch Legacy, they lasted 10 seasons. And in 10 seasons, we only faked one restaurant. And that was because of a time crunch of scheduling. We were in one building, in the building shooting some kind of office scenes. And we went up on the roof and made like a rooftop cafe that doesn't really exist. And it bothers me to this day that out of 10 years, all the places we went, all the restaurants, there's one that's a fake. And that I wish we didn't do that, but we did.
Here's a question here.
So I have an unusual question. I just read Proving Ground
Mm-hmm.
and the introduction of AI and the artificial buddies and the state of young people today. I almost did not want to read about it, but you brought us in, and I have since read a lot on that area, and I just like your comments on this, the future and the current reality we're in. Are you going to write any more about that situation? How many people have read Proving Ground? Okay, so that's so different than your past.
Well, I go backwards here. I don't know if I'll write about it again, because I just did. I like my books to be very contemporary. They're set in the year that they're published. And the AI is obviously an issue or a thing of the moment. I do like writing about the advent of newer technologies, and I usually use Jack McAvoy to do that, the reporter. Like my first book, The Poet, with Jack McAvoy, is about this new thing called the internet. And then I did one on data storage and privacy. I did another book on the unregulated DNA analytics business. And now this one's AI, and I wanted it to be a legal thriller, but I had to bring Jack into it because he's my science guy or my techno guy. But anyway, I think it was like a no-brainer to write about it because of you can't pick up a paper, it seems, these days without finding another horror story about the when you have a new technology and billions and billions and billions of dollars are at stake. you're going to have issues. And it's whatever you want to call it, a shakeout period. But the government usually comes in very late. Like right now, the DNA business still has no regulations. And it's going to be a while, I think, before there'll be government enforced AI guardrails. California's doing some of that. They're actually kind of on the forefront of doing that, but it's still not very much. And I don't want to be a preacher. I mean, I don't like to proselytize about what should be done. I want you to be entertained by my books and maybe learn something, or maybe ask yourself a question: is this the way we should be going? Is this the path we should be on? So I'm not saying AI bad. I'm saying right now that's a pretty accurate portrait of that industry, and it's unregulated. And that's why you end up with 13-year-old kids with robots that say it's okay to kill yourself or to kill your playmate or whatever. And there's so many examples of it, and it's a whole, it's a whole vogue in law to file lawsuits against AI companies. For me, this started about 5 years ago, and there was a story that was kind of big then. Probably people don't remember it, but this 13-year-old kid jumped over the wall at Windsor Palace in the UK with a crossbow, and he was going to kill the Queen. And of course, he's a 13-year-old. He didn't know what he's doing. He got tackled very quickly. But in the ensuing investigation, they learned that he had been asked to do, or he was given approval to do it by his AI chatbot, a very early one. This was before Chat PGT. And so I kept those stories in a file thinking, that could be a story down the line for me. And then a case was filed last year, very similar to the one in Proving Ground, and it brought a lawsuit. And I got a copy of the lawsuit, and the lawsuit was like 150 pages. And it was about this kid who committed suicide in Orlando, Florida, because his chatbot told him they would live in eternity if he killed himself, and he did. And the lawsuit was like 150 pages, but 100 pages of it was just a transcript of his conversation with his chatbot, and it was I was like seat of the pants reading. It was like a thriller in a lawsuit, and that's when I said, yeah, I'm going to write about this in a Mickey Dollar book. And interesting, that technology and that world is changing so fast. It takes a while to write a book, and then they sit on it and prep it for publishing. So I turned that book in probably last May, and then I had to sweat it out till it came out in October, hoping, that this is a stupid thing to think what might happen, that the government would suddenly have all these laws that are governing who can have chatbots and stuff like that. But I was worried about the technology passing by the book, the timeliness of the book. But that didn't happen. And in fact, that lawsuit out of Orlando was resolved a week after my book came out. I don't know if someone's asked me a question. I can't hear it.
Yeah, right here.
Because what you're talking about, and because I just read something like this, do you ever have you ever thought that maybe you'd want to set one of your books? I know you write contemporaneously of the year that it is, but set in the not near future, like say 20 or 30 years, and looking back, because then you can make, whether we went wrong or right on some of this, you can make judgments.
Yeah, that's interesting. Usually people ask, are you ever going to go back and write about Harry Bosch when he's in his 20s, or Vietnam or something like that? I think that might be the first time I've ever been asked whether I want to write about the future. I haven't really thought about that, but it's funny because I really like science fiction. But it's just I just don't feel like I'm up to that. To envision worlds 20, 30, 40 years from now. Maybe I'm not imaginative enough, so I haven't really considered that. But as somebody just asked in the chat box here to keep Harry Bosch alive, as I'm obviously past most of my writing days and fewer days left. I'm writing a Harry Bosch book now where he has, I guess you'd call them flashbacks, but some chapters are set in his past. Some going all the way back to when he was a teenager. And it's a big challenge for me. I don't usually do that. Like I've already said, very contemporary. The books are set in the year they come out. Well, this book is set in the year it comes out, but it has several chapters that are decades in the past.
One more question? One more question?
Do you write one book at a time, or do you have several books in your head, or writing several at once? You're so prolific.
Well, I'm very linear. I'm only writing one book at a time, but I kind of have usually one or two that I'm going to get to, and sometimes the ideas and aspects of them percolate or get in my head before I'm ready to go to them. So I'm writing this one now, this Harry Bosch book that's going to come out. I have one book finished, comes out in about a month. And then this one I'm writing will come out in November, I think. And then the one I'll write after that, I have the idea and I kind of know what I'm going to do. And that's it. I don't know anything else beyond that. But that keeps me going. So I have a question for Professor Park, and that is, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this class?
Well,
Wait, stop. This is his wife, Sylvia. I have to tell you that ever since last April, he's been thinking about this. That's why.
I just turned, this is the first day of my 97th year.
Wow.
And I am also legally blind. And I had listened to all the great books ever written, I thought. And I decided I remembered there was a wonderful Michael Connelly novel I read where he went undercover in a drug thing. And I thought, well, that was pretty good. And I thought, well, I'll start with the Black Echo. And I was I am so in awe of your thing. Over the years, I've read dozens and dozens. I'm not a scholar of detective novels, but you have far surpassed.
Thank you for joining us today. Hey, how are you?
And so
Toyota Grand Highland.
I just thought I'd retired from.
We're starting fresh in a new city or embarking on ambitious.
Your books were so inspiring that I wanted to come back into Osher, and they let me do it. And I'm so happy about it. And I'm so glad that you're here today. It's a great treat for all of us. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Well, yeah, I think you're doing a few of these classes, so I hope to be back.
You're allegedly written 2 novels before you did The Black Echo. You have the manuscripts of those novels, or what happened to them?
I have them somewhere in a box. And that wherever they are, they deserve to be there. But the key thing about those, they were part of the learning process. And the second one was better than the first, in my estimation. And, writers are always their harshest critic. So I knew that they should not be published, but they gave me hope because one got better than the other. And that encouraged me to take a third shot, and that became The Black Echo.
And were the first 2, were they Harry Bosch, or did you have another character?
No, I was living I grew up in South Florida. And I didn't come to Los Angeles till I was 30 to work for the LA Times. But prior to that, I was working for my hometown paper, the Fort Lauderdale News, and I was covering crime there. And I had written a story. Back then, Fort Lauderdale they called it the runaway capital of the world. warm beaches and all that kind of stuff. All these kids from the Northeast would come down for spring break and never leave. And so I wrote a story about a private detective who advertised in all the newspapers up in the Northeast that said like, "I'll find your kid." And he had the specialty of finding runaway kids in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And so that I wrote 2 books about a detective like that, and with that guy's help. And they were missing something. They were missing some level of character. And I think that's what I discovered between those 2 efforts and the third effort that was the one where Harry Bosch was born.
How old were you when you moved to Fort Lauderdale?
I was 12 from Philadelphia.
Me too.
So I will, I'm going to try. Yeah, I'll try to join your class. Not next week. I mentioned that our showrunner, the creative boss of the Bosch shows, passed away. I got to go to his funeral while you're having your class. But the week after, I'll try to join then. So think up some good questions.
Very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michael.
All right, thank you guys. Bye.
I have to say, there was somebody when this happened. This is, I need opportunity for Ollie to speak, talk to the author, you know.
Maybe.
Sylvia. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
See you next week. You have 2 weeks to get people, but you want to